basically started the Make magazine, got the Maker Fairs going. What was the first one? Was it 2004?
2006.
2006.
Yeah.
And he's going to talk to us about
Sure.
that history in the future.
Thank you. Well, nice to be here. I'm really interested in the talks that I've heard and the connections. There's actually quite a lot of commonality here. I mean, we're at different points in time, we're seeing very similar things. But I'm going to just do physical handouts. So this is a 1963 edition of Popular Mechanics. And as you probably know, Popular Science, Popular Electronics, there's a number. The word popular was popular, But I love we mentioned earlier, like flying cars or something, future oriented or promising was on the cover. This is actually kind of late in the period where they began reviewing cars and other things, set and forget lawn sprinkling, But what I thought was really fascinating in these magazines are things like, sand casting at home, and I'm a writer, a technical writer. I really like how-to information. I like to write, I like to learn how to do things. And I enjoyed that these magazines made it really accessible. They were really, for their day, very visual. They had lots of diagrams, illustrations. Even if you weren't a good reader, you could still get a lot out of them, which is something I kind of took in. And they were varied. Antique cobbler's bench. Make something woodworking. So they were broad, and the magazine industry is not terribly known, especially tech magazines are not terribly known for being broad. They'd be about laptops, or they'd be about mobiles, or something like that. Well, I had this idea that I was meeting people that were doing interesting things that seemed on the fringe of where the tech industry was going. This is in the early 2000s when Facebook and Apple and mobile phones and everything is software. But yet I saw people playing with physical things, whether it's robots or other stuff. And almost as Lee mentioned, this was something they were doing on their own. Why? Because they were interested in it. They were curious. They were building things. And what happens if I do this? And at the time, I was at O'Reilly, which does technical books. I started the book series there. We did conferences, open source. And the key idea of really open source was there was a project. Your code was a project. And I look back at these magazines and I said, well, that's what these were really about in their best. They were, even today, woodworking magazines, cooking magazines are about how to do something. And I thought we didn't really have that in technology today. Wired magazine, they talk about founders or blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't explain how something really works or how you might do it yourself. And so I was trying to marry sort of tech and what you might call DIY or do it yourself. And I just thought it was the fundamental reason people were doing this was because it was fun. And go back to this. It's just, that says, do it because it's fun. And you'll enjoy it. And so this, is the reason this is this size. In our first magazine in 2005, this kind of digest format. And the idea I had was to start sharing the instructions, just as open source was sharing code online. I wanted to share the procedures, the how-to instructions behind someone who did something. And we wanted to edit it, we wanted to select projects and edit them so they could be replicable. The idea is that you can do them. You may not want to, but if I just said, this is a project that some cool person did something, that kind of puts it out there, good for him. I want it to be about how you start to acquire that knowledge. And I had this feeling, I still do, that our consumer culture is disabling us. It is not, doesn't encourage us or empower us to think for ourselves, to build things for ourselves. It guy says, that's too much work, you don't have the time, here, just buy this, open the package. And the thing is, we open it, and we're not very satisfied with it anyway, we throw it out. So we just create more consumer waste. Whereas, really, the idea of making something is the process and the enjoyment and the satisfaction you get from doing it. And that's what I was after. And so I called the magazine Make, and it's actually a little bit of a pun, it'll see your computer. The second book we published at O'Reilly was called Managing Projects with Make. It's a Unix utility, and I thought, oh yeah, that's kind of an you put in the file, the Make file, you put Make colon, and that's kind of where the style came from. But I thought, we're not going to call our readers, we're going to call them makers. And I just threw it out there as a term. I didn't have any great plans for it. But it turned out to be actually something important. It is kind of a neutral term that anybody could use to connect their projects to other people's. And people, especially later in this process, academics and stuff, you never defined maker. And I go, that's right. I didn't intend to. I wanted you to define maker as you wish. So if you're a cook and want to call yourself a maker, fantastic. If you're a roboticist and want to call yourself a maker, go at it, right? It's about what people think. And this is kind of what motivates me still today is that it's just a human thing. And my experience and this sort of journey of being on it's in Silicon Valley, but it's in every culture, it's in every country, it's everywhere. And I remember one of the times, I think important in this history, after publishing a couple of years, it came out in 2005, someone asked me to do a TED Talk in Detroit where we just did preparation for a Maker Faire in Detroit. And I was kind of thinking what to say. And I knew from, the magazine when it was published did really well, about 25,000 subscribers, kind of off the bat. And I'd never published a magazine, and truth told, that was my goal here, was I loved that this was visual information, how-to information, and I found a subject matter that really kind of fits a magazine. I built websites and sold them in the 90s, but I thought, we can't do this on the web. We want to do it in print. I want to make it collectible. I want people to, this is about tangible things, so the things should be tangible. But when I did this TED Talk, I went into it thinking, I know there's a small segment of the world that are makers, that say, they get up in the morning and they say, this is what I do. Whether that term is the term they use, I really don't care, that they mean the same thing. Then in giving that talk, I said, I actually think everybody is a maker. They don't all, they don't all see it this way, but that's kind of my mission, is to convince them, not just the people that say, hey, I'm an engineer, I like to make things, but like, find the people that say I'm not, and convince them that, this is something they can do. And I think a bit about, I think Lee used an example of sports, is like, we grow up in a culture where you find out if you're athletic or not. There's plenty of opportunity for people to play a sport or get, be coached or find a field or and do things like that. Whereas I think with Maker, most people never get exposed to it. They never get encouraged. Nobody ever says, hey, this is fun, come along. And so that's kind of what I want to do here and have been trying to do. And so if you have a culture of consumers that are just, in a sense, taught to buy things, they don't really exercise their maker muscles. And so how do we give them these opportunities? Well, after I published Make for a year, I have to say this was driven by, I'm as I said, I'm a writer, I'm not a technical person, except I'm self-taught and I try to learn these things, and I kind of realize that most people that do this stuff are self-taught in a variety of ways, and it doesn't really matter whether you have this degree or that. It's just kind of your willingness to put the effort in and learn. But I was meeting some interesting people, and they weren't the people that are in the news. They weren't people that They're famous on TV by and large. And I thought, well, can I bring them together, you know? And I thought, well, this is kind of like a county fair. We just want people to bring the things that they make in private and share them in public. And I didn't care if they were good. I didn't care if they were finished. I just wanted them to be there to talk about it. Because I was trying to create this conversation so you could ask, like, well, what is that? Or how does that work? Or where'd you get that part? And that's, you know, it seems to me like that's where curiosity is generated. That to be able to talk something. And I said the other thing is looking in makers' eyes. Many of whom are kind of shy, somewhat awkward, you know, like engineers. You know, but when you got them talking about their own project, they became showmen. You know, they kind of came out of themselves and they said, hey, let me tell you about this. And I was like, the real interesting thing is, you know, it's like me talking about this magazine. I get real excited. But if you wanted me to talk about myself, I'd probably, you know, really what do you want to know, right? And this thing is like an intermediary that reveals who we are to someone else, right? Without us actually knowing that we're doing that. So there's actually some magic involved in this thing. And then, you know, this is a pretty good example of a project, our very first project. This is Chris Benton. He's a professor of architecture in Berkeley at the time, and he built rigs for kite aerial photography. And I thought, like, well, his idea was that first of all, as an architect and teaching students, he wanted to see buildings from different angles. And, you know, if you're on the ground looking up, it's one thing. He said, you know, you fly in a plane, you're looking straight down. If he could get up at 15, 20, 100 feet, he could see buildings and see around them in a different way. And so he had designed, he actually has probably up here or somewhere else, but, you know, a fleet of kite aerial photography rigs from ones with servo motors, but the one we were kind of interested in because it was just cheap and he could do it using, you know, a disposable camera, and the rig was built with popsicle sticks. And the trick was, you know, so, you know, this was kind of wound up, and it's a one-shot deal. He's going to put it up in the kite, fly it up in the air, and when it, you know, it gets a certain time, it's gonna hit. He called this, and it's a wonderful term, the silly putty viscous timer. Because he had a peg in it, he filled the hole with silly putty, and then he wound the rubber band. Then, so, you have about 90 seconds to get that up, and it puts a little ping pong ball at the bottom, so the ping pong ball would drop after the timer went off, and that's how we know that the shot was taken. But, you know, but he actually went on to become a photographer of, you know, all kinds of pictures around the coast of California. He did art. He made art out of this later on. He retired from Berkeley. But, you know, this is kind of our thing, it's a bit, you know, here's a parts list. Go find these parts. And, you know, here's the procedures. This is like a 30-page article, which I remember Chris Anderson saying, like, we would never publish a 30-page article. And I go, well, if it takes 30 pages to do the thing, I'm going to do it, right? But, you know, there was, you know, it's trying to create this idea that the world could be hacked and modified, mixed and remixed, and you know, I wanted to share that with more people, and that's sort of what Maker Faire, as I said, came from. It was really the people in the community that I saw, that each one of them, you know, if I could get them to tell their story and interact with people, and they could talk shop, that was the thing. So we did the first one in San Mateo, 2006, and it did, you know, it did bangingly well, you know, for what we were expecting. You know, craft fairs have 3,000 to 4,000. We think we had 10,000 to 15,000, you know, the first fair, and people came out. You know, they just brought stuff. And so one of the secrets that I'm really proud of is that I didn't have a theme or a preconceived notion of what I wanted at Maker Faire. I thought that was up to you. I wanted to find what you were doing on your, rather than, here's a contest. We want to save the world, or we want to have a water challenge, or we want to have X prize thing. I was just curious, what are you already doing? And why? So bring that to Maker Faire and talk about it. Because actually, when I saw, the ongoing delight of Maker Faire is I see better stuff than I could ever imagine going out looking for. So in the early days of the magazine, I'd try to find people doing things, and then through Maker Faire, they found me and said, here's what it is, and cool. In many ways, the Maker Faire is more successful than the magazine in terms of influence of it. But the magazine made it possible in the way that I think it established and connected this culture. And even if you weren't a reader or something else, there were enough people who said, yeah, I get it. This is what I do. And so, in about 2010, we began licensing Maker Faire out to other people. People coming to us and say, will you produce a Maker Faire in Seattle, or Portland, or Austin, or somewhere else? And I can't do that, I can't figure that out, so why don't you do it? And so we came up with like a model and a guidebook, and today there's over 200 Maker Fairs around the world in a single year. Today there's one in the country of Oman, of all places, in the weeks. Next weekend, not this weekend, next weekend, there'll be a Maker Faire at Rome, and they have one of our largest fairs. So, and there's hundreds of school Maker Fairs, and I think in retrospect, it was just kind of taking an idea around these projects and just asking people to kind of self-organize around this. And everybody had projects, and I love this is kind of my, it's kind of like fighting the open source battle a little bit. I really didn't care if they were trying to be startups or business. I cared that they had a good idea, that they were passionate about it. Some did. Little bits grew out of Maker Faire, raised $125 million, just got sold. MakerBot grew out of it, so it got sold for $555 million. If I could have got a little piece of that, it might have helped me float some of this a little longer. But, this summer we Maker Media, the company that was running this, I was running the company, but I had investors and other things. They just said they were done with it and wanted out, and so we closed the business. But I'm not done with it, and so I acquired the assets, and I'm trying to keep it going. It's now called Make Community. In reflection, I think what we built that's most important isn't Maker Faire, it isn't the magazine, it's the community. And now it's global. There's all kinds of people around the world. There's all kinds of spaces that are doing this. Actually, I skipped over that, but one of the things that excited me most, we designed Maker Faire for families, not for geeks, not for guys alone. We wanted everybody there, and we thought, because this is how you change the future, is to get everybody enjoying this. And so if it's craft and cooking and engineering and ceramics and all these things, these are all things in different ways and modalities of making. And most of us like to learn more than one. It's not just an electronics show, or not just this or that. But, seeing all these kids coming to Maker Faire and seeing, really, I believe they were seeing something they don't get to see on TV, something they don't get to see at school. And it kind of like, ooh, how do I become a maker? Now, if you go to a rock concert and see someone playing a guitar like crazy, you kind of can probably find an answer to learning to play guitar in your community. The same way, see someone playing soccer and say, hey, how do I play soccer or basketball? But this maker question was not something that was easily addressed. And so there were, Fab Labs had started, but they initially were something like $250,000 to $500,000 to set up, and kind of, it was really big institutions could afford them. And there was a notion of hacker spaces out there, but they tend to be geeky things, and I thought the term hacker wouldn't really play as well in like an educational setting. So in about 2010, I did some work and kind of started using the term makerspace and created some information about how to set up a makerspace. And what I'm really proud of is it's actually, I think, one of the most important innovations in education has happened during this time. Not because the federal government or state government believed it, not because education academies wanted it, but because teachers and students began to figure out it was important to do. And they would do it in ways that nobody said no. They bring it in the side door. And I started in one year at Maker Faire giving tickets away to teachers, and I asked them to fill out a survey and say, why are you coming to Maker Faire? And they go, I'm looking for projects for my kids, they're bored. And that's kind of been my, like, I don't care about curriculum. I don't care about subject matter. I care about the experience. A kid in school who could play with stuff and tinker and begin to sort of say, oh, I know what I want to do. And I can go online and learn it, or I can find other people to help me. Things like Arduinos and stuff are cheap, and they open doors. 3D printing, it's not the craziest thing, but it does seem to really appeal to kids. And one of the things that's interesting there is kids, when they see a 3D printer, will design things that you and I will never think of, right? I will try to design something I've seen before in the physical world. They actually realize that whether it's mathematically or something else, they can design a thing inside a thing inside a thing, or do this or that they've never seen before. And that's pretty wild. So, so that's the people side of this is really what drives me. Technology's an enabler, but just to give you, I was talking to someone that was in Shanghai. He said, I just got back from Africa and I was in a small village, and you know what I see there? I see your magazine and an Alibaba receipt, where people are finding projects from here, going online, buying parts from Alibaba, creating something they can sell in their village, right?
Wow.
That's pretty cool. So, as I said, I've kind of come back from the ashes, if you will. It's not really that bad, but the third thing to show you is this is the newest copy of Make Magazine. And this is volume 70, so about 15 years we've published 70 issues. We published one thing I want to get in, Andrew, we published an issue on kits. Well, it's a special issue, kind of like the history of kits. And it's MIT, I found, I wrote a whole thing. He said, the first edition of new technology comes out as a kit, and he went back all of the steam engine and did all this, and it was obviously true of computers and lots of things, TV. But we're trying to figure our way forward. I will say that I'm not, in some ways, Maker Faire Bay Area grew to be so large that it became, it kind of is increasingly risky to do for me, and I had to put money in to keep it going. And sadly, I can't get a lot of Silicon Valley companies to understand the value of this today, even though it's their kids that are coming to it, and even though it's their workers who are coming to it. The interesting thing I find also, I don't think, judging from a lot of interactions I've had at Maker Faire with engineer parents, they don't always understand how they became an engineer. They don't know how to help their kids become engineers. And it actually has nothing to do with engineering. It has to do with curiosity and play and love of this and fostering that. So that for me is what Maker really is as I've used it before, it's the idea of image, the root word is Latin, to love, and it's people who love what they're doing. And I always thought, if I can find that in a person, I found something really special. I don't know if they're successful in this or that, but I found something that is a unique kind of success. So thank you very much. Oh, yeah, East Bay Maker Faire, October 27th.
Okay, so there's a Maker Faire in here.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Mini Maker Faire.
Mini Maker Faire, that's right. I was just gonna say,
It's a good one.
yeah, I'd love to see us have a maybe not as large, but some version of Maker Faire next year.
Well, talk to me if you have ideas.
Yeah. And by the way, showing that popular mechanics, there's a magazine, Scientific American used to have this amateur scientists. And so I know when I was in high school, probably some of you also, I love that. And all this weird stuff. There's friend of mine and myself were trying to build a CO2 laser in high school.